I'm with Associate Professor Cathrine Neilsen-Hewett, Director of Pedagogical Leadership at Early Start. And today we're going to be talking about brain development, and we're also going to be talking about great experiences for children. So Cathrine, let's start with brain development in the first 5 years. What can you tell us about that?
I think firstly the first 5 years are the most critical years in terms of our developmental lifespan, and that is because those 5 years lay the foundation for future learning and development. And we know there's a lot of research that's now showing that many of the challenges that we see in adulthood, like unemployment, diabetes, heart disease, familial breakdown, can be traced back to pathways or routes that happen much earlier in our life. And we only really need to look at the research around neuroscience and brain development to really understand why the first 5 years of our life is so critical. So if we look at brain development, we know by the time our children start school that their brain has reached 90% of its eventual weight. So it's so rapid.
A lot. That is a lot.
Yeah, it's rapid and it's critical. So, and it's more rapid than any other time in our lifespan. So if we think about the connections, they really kind of create the map or our wiring of our brain. And those connections, or we refer to them as synapses, develop at 700 connections per second in the first 5 years. So we really see that the brain is so malleable to experiences. And it's useful to think that our genes create, they're like our social blueprint of how we turn out. But how the architecture of the brain and what it looks like once we start school is really dependent on the quality of the environments that children are exposed to, and even more importantly, the quality of the relationships that occur within those environments.
So when you are saying that, I'm thinking every second does really count, doesn't it? Because there's so many.
Every second counts in the first 5 years.
Yeah.
So and it's really important because those connections, and whether they're rich, developed connections or weaker connections, are really a testament to what experiences children are exposed to. So it kind of provides a roadmap of what children's lives have been like in the first 5 years. And I like to think of it, so our genes are like the architect if we're building a house. And then our environments are very much like the builder, the plumber, the electrician, and how solid our house is depends on the effectiveness of the people who are building our house. And that's very much how it works with children's brains. So those connections that are occurring within the first 5 years of our life really set us up for how we're going to succeed at school and how we're going to succeed at life. So how we're going to do in terms of the literacy and numeracy experiences, or what our expectations are like in terms of social relationships, or how we're going to be able to share or negotiate and communicate effectively. And those expectations and pathways are really set up in those first 5 years.
So can I take you back a little bit to talk about the neural pathways, because that's not something that is a common term that I know we've heard it, but it might not be in everybody's language or understanding. So what do you mean by a neural pathway?
So a neural pathway
and why is it so important?
Right. So the neural pathway is really looking at the synapses and the connections that happen within our brain. And that really affects, and I'm saying this quite generally, it influences everything that we do. So our expectations, but we're not born with those pathways. They develop through experiences. And so the richer the experiences that we have, so if we think about the child who is in a family where we experience responsive relationships, the parents are tuned into their emotions, the child feels valued and valuable, then it actually sets a pathway that influences the way that they interact with others, but also how they approach learning. The less palatable image for some children is that they might actually be in environments that are not conducive to brain growth and development. So we think about these pathways, the brain works, it's like a bit of a use it or lose it type of approach. So if we were to scan the brains of two babies just after they're born, their brains are almost pretty much identical in size and in weight. But if we fast forward 3 years, or to when children start school, and we were to scan their brain images again, we can see that the brains of 5-year-olds are quite different. And that difference can be attributed to the types of relationships that children have and the richness of the experiences to which they're exposed to. So if children are brought up in what is a term, James Garbarino termed this notion of what we call a socially toxic environment. So this is where children aren't read to, they're not responded to, they're not talked to, or at the extreme sense, they suffer abuse or neglect. Then we actually see that those pathways change in ways that are permanent. So our pathways are designed for us to learn. But for some children, we actually see that architecture is shifted. So their brains are wired for survival rather than learning. And that can permanently shift the way that they engage with others, but also engage in a learning environment. And what we see for those children is we see atrophy. So we see brain shrinkage and shifts in sizes.
So there's actually a physical change.
There's a physical shift. But not only that, it actually lays the foundations for how we interact throughout our life. So imagine the 3-year-old who's in an environment where they're promised, if you behave, if you're quiet, and I'm going to actually give you this lolly, or if you do this, then you're going to get that. But they never get what they're promised. So what that does to their brain, it says to me, I need to look out for myself because no one else is going to look out for me. So you take that child to a preschool environment where they're expected to share, expected to negotiate, sometimes expected to park their own desires and needs for those of others. What we see with those children is that they don't share because the message that they've received in terms of those brain growth and development is that you're not going to get this after me.
Yeah.
So it really shifts their expectations.
So in thinking about those good environments then, to take it to that, to what you were saying just a moment ago, good environments can be quite simple as well. So what are the sorts of things that you would consider to be in an environment that's conducive to great, brain development and to the development of those neural pathways?
Yeah, I mean, if I was creating a recipe for success for a healthy brain, then fundamentally the most important thing are the quality of the relationships that children are exposed to in the home environment. And as parents, we are children's first and most important teachers in life, and why early childhood education and care plays a really important role. We know the home environment is critical. So those, what we talk about is responsive relationships. So being in tune to your child's feelings, responding to their needs, spending time with them, talking to them, so that children are feeling valued and valuable. That is critical. That is the most critical aspect of parenting, and that children feel valued and that they feel safe and secure. Another aspect that's emerging is this notion of what we call opportunities for taking risks. And this is an interesting perspective because as parents, our automatic instinct is to protect children from risk. But what we're increasingly finding is that some measured risk is important for developing resilience in children. So what I mean by that is that children don't always get what they want all the time, that they need to be able to cope with failure or cope with disappointment. And so we do that in lots of different ways by letting them, so for instance, you're watching a child build a tower of blocks, and you know that the block that they're about to put on is probably too big to go on the top, and it's actually going to fall down. So our instinct might be to say, maybe don't put that block on. But what we know for children is actually let them do that and let them see what actually happens and that their tower falls down. So looking at ways that we can support resilience is the other thing. Security, so a sense of security, and that links to responsive parenting and notions of risk and resilience, that children feel safe and valued. And then the final aspect is providing rich learning experiences. And these aren't things like homeschooling. It's really young children learn best in the context of play. So it's about providing rich play experiences for children where they can develop their imagination, they can explore their creativity, they can learn problem solving, that it actually fosters their cognitive growth and development. And that would be my recipe for success for parents.
So what are the sort of everyday activities that do those things, that build the relationships, foster the confidence and perhaps some of the risk taking as well?
Yeah. I guess my go-to is imaginative play. I think that is one of play that actually actively engages children. It's really important, and the value of imaginative play, that it really actually spurs on children's curiosity. So it might be things like playing shops, playing mums or dads, being a bus driver, an imaginative play that is supported by adults. So parents actually playing with their children. So let's say your child wants to play shops. You might actually think, so I'd like to go to the shops and we might make some muffins tonight. What do you think we need for the muffins? So it might be extending children's play experience. So let's make a list of the ingredients. There's a literacy experience. Let's go through our pretend shop and take things off the shelf and put them in our trolley. Let's count how many things we've got in our trolley. There's a numeracy experience. And then actually make it so cooking is a wonderful play experience with children, and we see real science in the kitchen. So looking at changes of state, what might happen when we put the butter in the pan? Goes from a solid to a liquid, and if we cook it for too long it might go to a gas. So it's really about linking those experiences within the context of imagination and extending children's imaginative play. So we find that when adults become play partners and they're invited into that play experience by their children, it enriches the play experience, but it also extends the play experience. And particularly at times like these, we know that children who engage in a lot of imaginative play are less likely to suffer from boredom. So I've seen children who've been given a box of pencils and will turn that into a game around mums and dads and playing with pencils of different sizes and shapes. So it's really important for children to be able to engage in self-directed play. So that would be my one go-to.
The self-directed play, I think, is a really interesting one as well, because I think sometimes whether we're in a challenging situation where we're kind of intensively at home as we are now, or otherwise, there could be a feeling that you always have to be engaged and involved with your child's play or your child's activity. So that's not actually always the case, is it?
And involvement looks different. So parent involvement might be just supplying your child with materials, so thinking about open-ended parts or things like that. But I think it's very important for us as parents to know that our job is not to entertain children, because children learn when they are actively engaged themselves. So it's about also having time just to sit and pause. So for instance, reading would be another activity. Book reading is a wonderful activity that we can be doing with children. But so instilling a love of books with children then gives them opportunities to engage in that process on their own. So I think as parents, we need to really understand that there's a rhythm to the way that we interact with our children, and we don't have to be always on. So it's a bit like, I think of that medical model around when you're sick and you're that you've given a prescription of pills, and when you go back you take one pill per day, and over the 2 weeks that will get you better and will get you over your cold or whatever else that you're taking it for. And play works in the same way. So play is important, but if we were to take that whole packet of pills all in one day, then it's not going to make us better. So it's really about finding our rhythm and knowing that there's times when you actually want to support and engage children, but there's also times where you actually want to slow things down and really sit comfortably in the pause and the quiet and other things that you can do with children.
And I think it's also about reflecting as well, isn't it, on different children's dispositions and the way that they want to play, or some children are very happy to be playing in their own, on their own, but others will be requiring more support. So it's maybe thinking a little bit about that, reflecting on how much attention is great for children.
Absolutely, and you will know this, Leanne, this is something that we say with educators: take your cues from the child. So read the child's behaviour, and you'll know if you start playing with them and the playing stops that you probably weren't really being invited into that play experience. So as parents, we know our children best. So it's about taking the cues, and it's meant to be an enjoyable experience. But certainly we can be creative. So if we're thinking about other experiences, simple board games are wonderful. That's wonderful for developing resilience and problem solving in children. I love sensory play, particularly for children under the age of 2, that they really learn through their senses and the touch and the smell and the taste. So there's things like Play-Doh, which is wonderful for working through big feelings as well, because we can pound it, we can roll it. It's wonderful for our fine motor skills. And one of the activities that I've done with my children when they were younger, we used to do a sensory hunt in our neighbourhood, and we'd take our buckets out and we'd look for things that are smooth, or we'd look for things in our environment that are rough, or things that smell or don't have a smell. So there's lots of really simple things that we can do that are creative and that don't actually cost a lot at a time where we may not actually have the finances or the opportunity to go out and buy things. And I know the Discovery Space has been doing some really interesting work around kind of open-ended resources, or what we call small parts. So where I think last week they had the cardboard box challenge, and where people had to think about what they were going to do with a cardboard box. And I was looking online, and people have made fire trucks and princess carriages. Someone made a shape sorter out of a cardboard box.
Right.
Someone else turned theirs into a dress-up robot. So I love activities like that, where what children do with them is only limited by their imagination, and how we can support that.
Yeah, what's that ad? The cardboard box is priceless.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because that is that loose part, isn't it? And it is that open-ended activity. What about music and singing?
Yeah, being active, so creative arts is really wonderful in terms of being active at a time like this. And what I really enjoy about is music and singing is the opportunity for parents to actually share their own cultural history. So things like the songs that they used to actually dance to. So I think it's important. Play is something that
Before
is
they
only...
become embarrassed about their parents.
Absolutely.
Dancing.
I remember, so when my children were young, I used to sing all the time in the car, and you get to that point where they turn to that age where they actually ask you to stop singing, and I remember how disappointed I was by that. But I think play is about having fun, and at this time, particularly for adults, this is giving you some relief as well from the constancy as well. So it's finding that time at lunchtime. So my lunchtime 2 days ago was spent kicking the ball around with my 12-year-old, where normally I'd be drinking lattes over a work lunchtime. So it's finding those times in our day where we can actually have some fun as well.
Great. Yeah, it's a nice release, isn't it, for parents to or family caregivers to actually enjoy the day and not be faced with another meeting online or something else.
And reading books, like books if we're really focused on something to support our children under the age of 5 in terms of learning, in terms of language and communication, there's nothing more valuable than reading stories. And because it gives us that opportunity for the sensitive, responsive relationships that we say are critical, so we share that. It allows opportunities for cultural exchange, so often we share our own love of books and the stories. So I read The Enchanted Wood when I was young, and then I've read it again with every single one of my children, and enjoyed it more each time that we've read it. But it's also important for children's cognitive growth, so it really enhances their attentional capacity for sitting and listening to books, but it also opens us up to the world and languages. So they hear words like magnificent or transcending, or words that might not become part of our everyday conversations, but it also takes us outside our typical experiences, and by exposing children to different types of genres, so poetry, reading information books, going through recipes or environmental print, what have you got on your t-shirt? So those kind of things really lend itself really nicely to supporting children's language and communication as well.
Cathrine, I think we could talk all day, but I think the message is play is great for the brain, give yourself a break, have a play,
Absolutely.
and create lots of opportunities for children, and don't feel the pressure to create too many complex activities, because play, self-directed play is a wonderful thing for brain development.
Yeah, and just remember those first 5 years, you are the most critical person in your child's life, so feel valued and valuable.
Thank you. How's that?